is like a typical rural site of both labor supply and resource extraction. And Wuhan, I can give you a bit of context. That's Wuhan. That's where I'm from. It's a key metropolis in central China. In terms of population size and area, it's actually similar to London. And the village is really at the outskirts. And from here to here is roughly 1 to 2 hour drive. So it's not that far away. So the village on the right-hand side, most of the villages, they are or were part of the floating population. In registration, they are 1,000 people. And in reality, around 200 to 300 still living there. So that's the kind of size we're talking about. So then 3 stories, Pond, Yard, Pinewoods. These are fragments of life in Shigushan. And these are also, for me, situated perspectives looking at the social and ecological dependencies of China's urbanization. And that's a summary of different methods or perspectives we've been working with throughout this 10-year process. So this structure you see here is really an open-ended assemblage. It's not a logical machine, and we don't offer an all-encompassing narrative. So we share 3 stories here while alluding to the so much more out there. So that 10-year process for us is as much about the subject as it is about the methodology. If the life was of those rural migrant workers, they're in a perpetually indeterminate state, and then it requires methods that are attuned to such characteristics. So ultimately, our practice and their way of life intertwined. So get started, pound. There's the pound, and this is a post-harvesting fish pond. And fish harvesting is a quite tough job. Getting up at 3 in the morning, catch fish in the freezing cold so that the fish can reach the morning market on time. Just a glimpse of life in that village. And then the fish pond is on the mountain top of Shigushan. This village name in Chinese literally means stone-born mountain, as you can clearly see. The fish ponds here on this mountain top are in fact part of the formal stone extraction site during the nationwide collectivization known as the People's Commune in China. Very briefly, the historical context. The People's Commune was an all-encompassing political, economic, social, and spatial model to enact an explicit socialist ideal in rural China between 1950s and 80s. And then the commune radically remade land and people's lives. So back in the village, in the 70s, hills were flattened and stones extracted from the mountaintop we just saw to make 3 rows of communal housing that are still standing today and still in use today. So one comment on the housing design, it was the essential device of the state to dismantle family as the unit of production, governance, and social structure. So in the ideal communal housing, which is on the right-hand side, you can see it was to abolish living room and kitchen so that living units were reduced to a combination of bedrooms. So this meant no space for family shrines or food sharing, which then all meant to weaken the patriarchal authority. But that's the reality in Shigushan. This is the comparison between existing rural health before the commune and then the ideal commune proposal. And then here, what we're looking at is the realized commune housing, which shows a much more nuanced reality than the commune ideal. So on the right-hand side, that's the 13 rows of housing. They appear to be standardized housing rows, but they in fact made up of differentiated housing units based on different family structures. That's the interesting part, the friction between facade and plan. According to the village leader, those variations in plan actually took into consideration the age of children, their sex, the number of generations sharing the units, which means the housing was still, to an extent, defined by family and its size. So then this housing design actually mediated, in spatial terms, the tension between the modern state and the family tradition. And the most common setting of the living room is a family shrine to Mao, which is the Chairman Mao, which is the founding father of PR China, who initiated the commune movement instead of family ancestors. So it's the family shrine to Mao rather than their own family ancestors. So this just attests to the paradox that the commune is in fact resembled and renewed the traditional social spatial structure that is set out to destruct. No, these are all my own photography.
Your own.
Yeah, this is 2016, that one 2017. So these are contemporary situations. Yeah.
But these are not the buildings that you showed that were supporting or were reintroducing family structures. Those were from an earlier period of time.
This is a old commune housing, and then that's a newly built family house. So this one is literally one of this.
Okay.
So it is from that. But the interesting thing is, in their newly built, self-built houses, the arrangement is very, very similar. That's the point. It's like the commune system was meant to destruct the family structure, but at the end, it's something between, right? And then that's kind of like the contradiction I showed between the plan and the facades. It's the same here. They still have a family shrine, so that's part of the patriarchal tradition, but it's a shrine to Mao. So that's the paradox here. Right, so back to the mountaintop. So on the right-hand side, this kind of vertical section, what we see is the extent of the stone extraction. We're literally looking at the depths of the stone extraction. But in the parts where the stone extraction stopped, as you see here now, some villagers started to nourish the dry land on the mountaintop, cultivating new lives by turning the big extraction holes into fish ponds. So this is both care for the land, but also for personal financial gains. So the extraction sites, we could see it as scarred landscape that carry a radical political history. And then the fish ponds are forms of opportunistic reparation of the scarred landscape. So just like what we see in the implemented commune housing, it's a mix of obedience and agency. And the fish pond like this came into being is also a tiny bit of reality of China's economic reform, starting from the 1980s that replaced the commune system. Because cultivation fish pond for your own family is not possible at all under the commune system. Activities like this, fish ponds, are only made possible by the new household responsibility system of production and land management in rural areas. And then that alludes to the much bigger systematic change, which is the economic reform. Without getting into too much length into it, just that quote from Deng Xiaoping, let some people get rich first. This really explains in the plain words the justification for territorial hierarchy, and then the assumption of the trickle-down effect of economy. So from city to districts to town, and to village. So this is the 4 levels I'm going through. That's Wuhan. And then going to one district into Wuhan, and then town, and then village. So that's how we arrive at Shigushan.
The idea being that money will trickle down from the center to eventually find the village at some point.
The idea
In the
is
sense of the chairman's announcement was that.
yeah, the assumption that the economic activity gonna trickle down. But then what we see is this, if this kind of territorial hierarchy really leaves the countryside in an end-of-line condition, with small towns and villages forming satellites of satellites. And then this kind of systematic setup exploits rural areas in the name of the long-term national economic development. So as a result, as of today, the meaning and value of the countryside is always framed through the city and its own identity and autonomy alone lost. So over time, it constitutes an act of symbolic violence. In concrete terms, back to the village, this has led to the intensified resource extraction for urbanization. And also what has been, apart from the stones, what has been drawn into supply chain is rural labor. And the outflow of labor from the countryside, that is the 295 million rural migrant workers we mentioned briefly, has resulted in the middle generation missing from more than 80% of rural families in China. That's literally the moment of one family dissolving captured on camera. So the result is grandparents and young children are left behind in the village, economically dependent on the middle generation working in the city. But then back to this overview, I hope to convey that territory is a machine where political and economic forces push and pull the flows of materials and labor. And that's the story of the rural migrant workers and the territorial apparatus come together in this travel route between Wuhan city center and to Shigushan village. So let's get on this travel route. It's a trip starting from a construction site in central Wuhan, which is the usual work environment of rural migrant workers. And now we are traveling across the Yangtze River and now going through the industrial zone at the outskirts. And then we are going into the suburban districts. And then now entering the rural towns. And later we will arrive at Shigushan village. What I have here is a double journey. Double journey, I think, is my personal journey that I've been on for many times for field work for the past 10 years. But it is also a journey for villagers in Shigushan, as this is the kind of cyclical journey many of their family members take to make a living. And then now we are entering the village. That's the marker stone of the village. It says Shigushan. So the depiction you see here is partially informed by villagers' experiences, such as the construction site or the port they worked at, or the highway and station that bring them home. But it also comes from my own architectural training in understanding the territorial organization. So it's in this sense that it's a double journey. If their story is also my story. And now here, finally, we are arriving at the home of Xu, and then this is the lady we met at the beginning of the school, the construction worker. We will see her later as well. So that's the school in its full scope. Just want to take a moment to talk about school as methods. I guess it's obvious I learned this compositional logic from traditional Chinese landscape painting. So in this kind of composition, what is emphasized is the experience rather than the view of it. There's no start, no climax, no end, no single center, and no single viewpoint. So it's about creating layers and layers of juxtaposed conditions in continuity, one leading to another and then beyond. So there are dimensions of time and the movements weaved into it. The drawing is still, but I would say it's a still moving image. The principle is juxtaposition. So juxtaposition here means parts come before the whole. Even it's like a full score, but it's not about the totality or the overview. It's actually about each part and then how each parts are sitting next to each other. Because for me, when I was drawing this, each part and components, they open up a micro lens into the abundance of life situated in that fragment. So the overall, it is patchy for sure, and it could be disorienting. But having working on this drawing for a while, I realized this kind of patchiness or disorientation, if this is not how one experiences a territory or even life in general. So ultimately, all these patchy fragments come together and constitute a whole. So they are being held loosely in relation to each other, not offering overview, but also not falling apart. That's kind of the what I call structured ambiguity. And then this principle of structured ambiguity is also how stories of rippling are held together. So with the score, with that score journey, we arrived at the home village end of the floating journey. So the story of yacht. So what happens here in the home village? Those changes, they make possible the labor supply of rural migrant workers. And the labor supply of rural migrant workers makes possible China's urbanization. The missing middle generation, they often send a large portion of their earnings back home to sustain the livelihood of family members and also to fund the construction of new family houses. That's the houses we're looking at. So this area view is actually an acute irony because there are fewer and fewer people living in the village, but there are more and more self-built family houses that stand half vacant. So the population is shrinking, but the village is growing with empty houses. And then those houses are generally considered a threat to the beauty of the countryside. But I would say these ordinary houses, they embody the contemporary reality, and then they actually manifest a fundamental change in the idea of family and domesticity. Looking closely into one house, this is the living cluster of two brothers' family who live together. So here what we can see is the various demands for independence and sharing among family branches and generations. So on this part of it, if these two brothers' family, they live in the same 3-story building on that part. They have identical yet separate entrances, living rooms, and staircases. It's literally mirrored, but it's separate. And even though half of the room in that main building are vacant, their parents still choose to live in the adapted old schoolroom across the streets, which is this is old school, and then their parents live here. So then what holds this family together is the shared kitchen garden, and actually also shared with a neighboring family. So then this element come together through the yard, where all three parties of the household and the neighbor share kitchens, toilets, and kitchen gardens. And then that's the yard. In here, there's a lot of reading can be done for the daily objects and how things are being used. They really tell it's a space for association and negotiation. Because on the one hand, cooking, eating, governing, the care of children and the elderly are shared and joint responsibilities, which largely defines the daily life of these families. But on the other, there's also a sense of separation, reminding that all of this takes place in a delicate form of collaboration within extended family between genders, generations, and households. So in a way, the yard is a spatial structure through which domestic labor and subsistence production are organized. So the yard mediates family relations. And then since we are in their yard, let's meet Liu family. And we met because the fire.
你看我又泡汤一下，我来放假，你莫帮我，我来放假嘛，别是你们在，我两个放假，我们这个有吃的，
我是可以了。他我里边的老在那些。
that's a short clip of the film on the margins. I will actually skip this part. This is well, I guess with architects in the room, you can probably recognize there's something weird about this thing. Because this kind of composition is not possible in reality. So, but it's also not purely, let's say, it's not pure documentary, but it's also not fiction. It's somewhere in between. So that's why we call it architectural reconstruction of filmic space and time. Maybe there's interest we can bring up in the conversation, but I'll skip this part for now. It's yeah, it's like a section. So perspective and so in reality, this part is just one wall. But here you see the wall has a volume. Here the wall has a volume. But that's not, it's not the case. In reality, the same here. We do this to bring out the spatial and social and spatial relationship we think is in the instance of how they manage the family relation. But if we just do the documentary, it won't show. It's just it's like reality is not enough. So we do this kind of.
Like the previous comment about the fragmented scroll being actually the experience
Yes.
that we have. We often think that realism or reality has a certain image, as in the perspectival image is more real than you know, like a 8th century scroll or all the representation method. But in reality, what you said at that point really can resonate everything, like that our everyday life is not necessarily set in an alien or or Renaissance painting. It's more about these fragments, and I really enjoy this kind of correlation between the text and this video. It makes so much sense.
Exactly.
Yeah,
you totally get it. That's we didn't intend it. It was out of frustration because we've been filming for years, and then when we look at the footage again, it's like it just doesn't capture. So then the architect's mode comes into play, and then we started doing collage, and then it starts to make sense to us. Okay, this should be how we capture the life then. Okay, I'm moving toward the third story, which is Pinewoods. And then here, just to contextualize, that's the overview of the village. And then you see patches of pinewoods around. So pinewoods, get down into the pinewoods. So now the rural areas, they're actually on the collective land ownership, which is a legacy from the commune era. So under this collective land ownership, each household has rights to a parcel of land in the village for farming or planting, in addition to a house site. And then pine trees require rather low maintenance. And because of this, an important group of pinewood caretakers is elderly women. A lot of them are widows and live alone. We call them grannies. It's a local term for respect and affection. I know it may mean different things in different culture, but we use it as a term for respect. So grannies collect oil-rich pine needles for cooking. It's free, and it can also help reduce the fire risk of the woods in hot and dry seasons. And also because being oil-rich, so sap harvesting is a way for the elderly caretaker to generate small income without much physical work for themselves. But it has consequences for the pine woods though. But when larger incomes are needed, pine trees can be sold to the local factory. There, the pine woods become veneer and then become plywoods going into the construction industry or furniture making. So through these timber products, grannies who are no longer part of the floating population, they're still entangled in the material flows between the countryside and the city. So for grannies like them, their pine woods are a form of basic economic security. The state pension provision in China, despite covering a wide range of the population, is far from enough to provide a strong financial safety net. So the pine wood is like a forest-based security in a way, but this forest-based security is very fragile. We witnessed the pine woods being destroyed by accidental fires, heavy snows, and also most recently destroyed by the expansion of Wuhan's new 6th ring road. In the interest of time, I'll skip this part. This is mostly talking about the living condition of the Guaranis, how they are the marginalized group out of a marginalized community. There's double marginalization groups. Yeah, in the interest of time, I'll skip for that. But they also develop tactics or habitats. As for example, this kind of take a stool, really seats at the street corner, different kinds of spatial thresholds. In a way, it's like pushing their own bodies to inhabit the thresholds on a collective scale. It's important that it's not one person sitting there, it's a group of people sit there. So they are actually building up a elastic field of support and a sense of relativeness between them. This is like really mundane, but in a way, it's important to reconfirm social bonds beyond family, which is really crucial when the state welfare is insufficient and the core family members are absent. So we call this active waiting. And back to the pine woods, another main group of caretaker are middle-aged women who float most frequently, and then we call them aunties. They have the highest mobility among all rural migrant workers, this age group, because they provide much caregiving labor to the family, such as looking after newborn when needed. So the low maintenance of pine woods becomes an ideal option for their land at home. And the high mobility of the aunties actually results in the increased planting of pine woods in the village. So here, a socio-economic condition of rural migrant workers actually becomes an ecological condition of the village landscape. And when the aunties float, they tend to go in small groups with relatives and friends. This is another type of rippling. So when they are in the village, they like to dance by the streets after dinner like this. One of the really rare moments in which they can be themselves, free from work and family duties. So there's a profound sense of liberation in their movements. And then that later on, you will see we were doing improvised dancing work with them. That's because they dance already by themselves. So a bit of semi-summary. So here, the state of rippling and dissolving, what we've seen just now is an elastic form of association through the act of mediating between generations, household neighbors, and the village community. And that even spread to the cities through floating. So importantly, is dissolving the family is a temporary transient state that becomes part of a broader structure rather than an exception. It's not a state they are trying to overcome in order to reach another place. This indeterminate floating status is the thing, is the thing they're in. So again, and then all of that is sort of structured or around a new definition of domesticity. And then in that sense, the domesticity is really untamed. So I'm really cutting rushing the arguments, because where I'm getting to is this is where supposedly I can conclude my research, and that's kind of how I concluded my PhD. And then the essay or the paper you see in the folder also concludes this way. But there's always a but. The but is, so arriving at this proposition, it's like, that's like halfway of the research, like 5 years in. But I mentioned that we've been doing this for 10 years. So the other 5 years after this, it's more like a reflection, as in the longer I work with the villagers, the more I feel like who's telling the story. If this is a work about them, what I presented is still my account, even though I'm trying to be inclusive, engaging with their perspectives, but still it's my account. So that is a major turning point of the research. And that's a bit of reflection on the school. I'll skip. So that's the new phase I'm talking about. We are trying towards co-curation. And then during this new phase, I'm collaborating with Cheng and Mofan. Mofan is a theater director and a choreographer. And we started to try improvisation, especially with the aunties on dancing. Improvisation for us is to create conditions in which the villagers can become more active rather than us as trained architects, anthropologists, and choreographers parachuting into the village to study them. Just give you one example what we mean by improvisation. Because the aunties, they dance by the streets, and but this site, if the abandoned People's Commune Hall, we have that brief history of People's Commune. It was a highly politicized moment, and this is the Commune Hall, but it has been abandoned for decades. It was even used as a pigeon farm. And we kind of prompt the aunties, instead of dancing by the streets, to dance in this Commune Hall, because this place, they have the memory of being a young child in this place for political propaganda. It was never a place for themselves. And then we kind of prompt that. And then they happily take the challenge and then turned that Commune Hall really into, it gives a completely different meaning to this Commune Hall. Just one example, there are many more of this. What we are trying to do is to do as much as we can to see the villagers really not as sources of qualitative data for subsequential interpretation, which is usually the case in anthropology. So for us, especially the longer we work with them, they're not abstract research subjects. They're just they're not subjects, like their experience can be abstracted and then reduced to either victim or hero narrative, which we've seen a lot. More and more, they're just real people we are trying to connect with. So it's a relationship at the end. Like another example of improvisation. Here we just visit the granny and then say, how do you feel about taking a family portrait today? And these pumpkins, like 20 old pumpkins, because she's living alone, and then those pumpkins are her family. So that's the family portrait we had. So that's the kind of improvisation I'm talking about. So we are really trying to stimulate their own performative expression and also storytelling and imagination that are otherwise hidden. It's just very light touch. It's kind of similar to the reconstructed film I was talking about. It's not documentary, but it's also not fiction. So it's kind of one step out of reality, not yet into fiction. So that's the delicate line we're trying to walk. So to wrap up, so 2 years ago, we organized a screen back event in the village. That's footage from the event. because we've been filming for years, and we showed them what we filmed, and then we had that event in the abandoned commune hall, because the commune hall has a special political meaning in it. So our film installation turned the commune hall from a political site into a theater of everyday life. And then that event, almost entire village came, and they loved it. So we also loved it. So the film has won awards, but really among all the recognitions, this is the most significant to us because they are enjoying film. So yeah, I guess this is a attempt for us to join with marginalized communities in their situated perspectives and embodied visions. Yeah, at the end, we don't have any theoretical or profound conclusion. I guess it's all the experience of being with them, what it means to be with somebody. And it requires time, attention, trust, and openness. It's not easy at all. And then it takes some unlearning, and then it takes misunderstanding, it takes back and forth, it takes time. Yeah, I'm skipping through things, and I guess, yeah, I'll probably wrap up here. I have the last session about how exhibition making is another practice of rippling, as exhibition is not a conclusion, but more extending new exploration, finding new interlocutors. But I'll leave that for conversation. Just skip through the things. This happens in London on Bedford Square half a year ago. It was the occasion of like a 10-year review exhibition of the project, but we're looking at it as a way to starting new relationships. Yeah, I'm just skipping through. Yes. Oh, and here.
Thank you very much.
That's the choreographer, by the way, the one in the middle. We walk through it. Maybe since this is on the screen, there's something again quite odd about this. There are two temporalities in it. If you see the way she walks and then the way other people walk. We didn't manipulate it, by the way. It was a 3-hour durational performance, and then we simply speed up the footage 2,500 times. This is 3 hours, like in 10 seconds. And then we realized, there are two temporalities, because she was performing so slowly that it inserts a different tempo reference onto this public space. We only realized it, probably she intended it, but we only realized it